My name's Todd Anderson. I run the race truck here in Europe. Today we're going to talk about brakes. The first thing that I look at when I'm getting poor braking power is brake pads. See what the conditions of your brake pads are. Usually what will happen is they're worn out. Some people take them all the way to the metal. Some people wait till the spring makes contact with the brake rotor, but ideally, you replace it before that. The best way to check the condition of your pads, pull your wheel out. We're going to go ahead and actually remove those pads. Just get a really good inspection of them. There's a little safety clip on the back here. Pull that guy. Pull out the retaining bolt. Super easy. Grab the top of your spring and the two pads. Pull them out. Now you can separate your pad, take a look at them. What you want to do is take a look and see, first of all, how much material you have, and then the condition of the material. Is there chunks taken out of it? How are they looking? If we do replace the pads, grab a new set, put them in just as you took them out. It's pretty self-explanatory. Basically want to give it a little squeeze, make sure your spring's set right. Make sure your spring's up against the metal backing of your pad. Drop them back in. So another thing that'll happen is when your pads are worn, your pistons actually have to move further in order for your pads to make contact. So with the new set of pads, we want to reset those pistons back into the brake caliper. I do that by putting your new pads back in, putting your retainer bolt back in. Not so tight, just right up to where it makes contact with the brake caliper. Stop there, put your safety clip back in, you're good to go. Now we want to spread those pads back out. Make sure your pistons are back into your caliper. This is the Avid Pro Brake Bleed Kit. Comes with a pad spacer. And the cool thing about this, you can drop this in here and that will reset your pistons for you. This is a tool made by Park. Does the same thing. You can come in from the backside and spread those pads as well. Now your pistons are back into the original position. You can put your wheel back in there, work your brake a couple times, and that will get it back into the right position. But while our wheel's out, something that makes our brakes feel really great is something that we call pad advancement. And basically what I'm going to do is exercise these pistons, move them in, move them back out, move them in, move them out. And what that's doing, when the piston comes in, it allows the dot fluid to come into the gland ring and lubricate that thing. So just makes them work a lot better. And it's a super easy technique. With the wheel out, with the rotor out, just compress the brake. Take a look down here. Your pistons come in, the pads make contact. Going to take the pad spacer, open them back up. Do it 2-3 times. Bring your pads in, have them make contact, open them back out, bring them in, open them up. Going to throw the wheel back in. Should be perfect. The next thing I want to do is to see if I have any brake rub. Easy test. Spin your wheel, you can actually listen for any kind of rub going on. Normally, your caliper is exactly the same position it was in before you put the new pads in. If you do have some brake rub, this is how you get your brake caliper centered again. So depending on what mounting bolts you'll use, you either have a T25, which is what we have here, or a 5mm. Pretty easy to do. All you need to do is just loosen up your bolts, just about a quarter of a turn, just to where your caliper moves freely. And what we're going to do is use the rotor to center the caliper. And I like to give it a little spin, slowly apply your brake, and now your rotor has positioned your caliper exactly where you need to do it. Run your bolts down to where they just make contact. Don't over tighten them just yet. Flex your brake pads a little bit. Turn your wheel, see how it works. Looks great to me. Let's send those things home, tighten them up. If you do find that this technique doesn't work, there's a couple things you can do. Try to determine if it's the front or the rear portion of the caliper that's actually that's rubbing. You can look down through the top of your brake pads and rotors, and there's a little space between your pad and your rotor. Try to determine which side has a greater space. Loosen up your bolts ever so lightly, but having enough resistance to where your brake caliper doesn't twist around too much. Just position it by hand. Try to hold it in that spot as you tighten down your binding bolt. So another contributing factor to inconsistent brake feel would be a bent rotor. Spin your wheel and keep your eye on the rotor and where it mates up with some stationary part on the bicycle. I look at the mounting bracket and the rotor, spin the wheel, and if you get a little hop, just like a wheel that's out of true, rotors do the same thing. What happens is, as the rotor comes through and it's bent, it pushes that piston back in, and then it moves back into its normal plane. That's going to give you a really weird brake feel, because then it's resetting your pistons, and then you go to grab the brake, and your brake lever has to travel further before your pistons come in and make contact with your rotor. And then the bent rotor will actually push it out, or also give you a pulsing feel at your brake lever. The best way to fix a bent rotor, unfortunately, is to replace the rotor. Some people can true them up pretty well. Sometimes I have success doing it. Most of the time I don't. For us here on the truck, it's just best to replace it. The cool thing about replacing a rotor is you do not need to replace your pads. So you can use your old pads with a new rotor. You do need to go through the bedding process again. And what's happening when you're doing the bedding process is you're actually taking material from your brake pad and embedding it into the steel of your brake rotor. And it's those two materials, when they come together, that actually give you your braking force. So very important to bed in your brakes properly. So that should take care of everything here at the caliper end of things. So let's take a look at a few tips on the lever. So some wives' tales out there about bleeding brakes is that gravity plays a big part of it. I just leave the bike in the bike stand exactly as it is, hook up my syringes to the caliper and the brake lever just as they set on the bike, and begin my process. There's no need to angle the bike in any manner. There's no need to twist your brake levers into a more vertical position. Leave them as is. Just do the procedure as recommended. So the proper technique that SRAM and Avid have set up to adjust to bleed your brakes is to have the pad contact in the fully closed position. When we're working on athletes' bikes here on the truck, oftentimes we'll put that pad contact in about the middle adjustment. Bleed the brake normally as Avid sets up. And then what that'll do is it'll give the athlete more adjustability. He can open it up to where he's getting a little more travel, or you could close it down to where the brake lever is just barely moving before it makes contact. This is totally rider preference, but this allows them to get that preference that they need. We've gone through and we've got our brakes working really well. We've got new pads in, the rotors are nice and true. Everything's bled properly. So now what we want to do is, I like to ride my bike to where both of the brake levers are in the exact same position. And the way you do that is work with your pad contact. So I'm going to actually measure my brake levers, see that they're the exact same distance starting off. And if they're not identical, you can use your reach adjuster to get them in the right position. Perfect. Now I want to check to make sure that my brake levers are making pad contact in the exact same position. I do that by eye. You can also use a rule on this, but I can see that my rear brake is traveling a little further than my front brake, so I'm going to use the pad contact to bring that back in. That looks really good. So it's easy to assume that if you have your pad contacts on both brake levers in the same position, that the brake feel is going to be the same on both. It's really not the case. You really need to use the pad contact to fine adjust the brake levers to equal them out. So I really hope that helped you guys out. Hope your brakes are going to be working great, and really get out there and ride them.